Welcome, everyone. It is so great to see everyone here tonight in a lovely, lovely evening here on the East Coast and getting ready for Passover. My name is Uri Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of the Slifka Center for Jewish Life at Yale. And together with my colleague, Rabbi Jason Rubenstein, the Howard M. Holtzman Jewish Chaplain, I really want to welcome everyone tonight who's joined us for this evening's program, Slifka Online Salon, entitled "God Didn't Create the Seder to Put You to Sleep," with author, podcast host, and Yale Law School graduate, Mark Gerson. Passover is almost upon us, and it is wonderful to be able to bring high quality content to our community here in this forum. Mark, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We'll get to the program in just a moment.
It is great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Couple of things by way of introduction as usual. Tonight's salon really embodies a number of Slifka Center's goals. It brings the Jewish calendar along with its values and traditions to life for our constituents. It contributes to the world of Jewish ideas. And also it models a type of innovation and creativity and perspective that we hope that our students will make in their own rights to Judaism now and long into the future because of what they experienced when they were involved with the Slifka Center. The Seder is such an extraordinary experience. Its education, its history, culture, storytelling, theater, and food, all of the elements of a really powerful experience. And our job is to make sure that that experience translates through to college students. And we're so excited to do that in a different forum here tonight. Even though we can't have in-person Seders in the Slifka Center this year, we're providing meals, Seder meals, Seder plates, and food for Passover for hundreds of students, both on and off campus. Students are organizing for themselves and their peers around topics that are of interest to them. We also, of course, hope that this will be the last Passover in exile from the center and from the campus. It's really extraordinary how this experience of exile from our normal lives and the institutions that we are normally at or with is so similar or has so many parallels to the Passover story. And so that sense of exile is something that perhaps this year we can feel even a little bit more closely or personally. We were slaves in Egypt. We were here during the coronavirus exile. Lots of stories will come from this year as from last, and that will pass down from generation to generation. And collectively, we are the teachers and the protagonists in our own lives, in our own exile stories. Imagine what role we can play and what role we have the opportunity to play every year as storytellers and protagonists from stories that we are a part of but happened longer ago. Our job is to give students the tools and experiences to carry these and other Jewish ideas into their own lives, into the lives of their peers. We're so fortunate to have Mark contributing in this meaningful way to Slifka Center's work. In this time of being thankful and giving back, another public service reminder that Yale University is granting reunion and capital campaign credit for gifts received by this coming June 30th to our construction project, which is gut renovation of the kitchen, the kosher kitchen, and the dining hall, as well as our security infrastructure and other elements of the Slifka Center building. So don't miss out on this once-in-a-generation opportunity. Please feel free to contact me or Rabbi Jason if you have any questions about this unique opportunity, which again expires on June 30th for Yale reunion credit and capital campaign contribution credit. So on to tonight's program. As usual, Rabbi Jason Rubenstein will introduce Mark more formally, as well as tonight's program. He'll also take your questions and comments in the chat, which can be found along the bottom of your Zoom screen. We want to remind you the session is being recorded and will be available on our website along with recordings of our previous Slifka Center salons. We also hope that you'll take a moment to fill out the survey that we'll post in the chat at the end. We're so excited to share these Slifka salons with all of you in keeping with Slifka Center's goals to explore the intersection of what is Jewish, American, and Yale in our constantly changing world. It's now my pleasure to turn over the program as usual to my friend, teacher, and colleague, Rabbi Jason Rubenstein, and to all a wonderful and happy Passover holiday.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ori. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Mark, for producing an awesome book and being here in dialogue tonight. So I want to just introduce Mark. Mark Gerson is an entrepreneur, a businessman, a philanthropist, does incredible work in Africa and in Israel. You can read all about him on Wikipedia. And I want to share is a really fun conversation partner. Mark and I met through his podcast, The Rabbi's Husband. Just to give you a sense of the scope of this, my guess is that Marco Rubio and I share two things, one of which is the first three letters of our last names, and the second is that we both appeared on Mark's podcast. So just to give you a sense of the different types of people. I think even people with last names that don't start with RUB can be featured sometimes as well. And as Uri said, you know, when people ask me often, you know, what does success look like at Slifka Center? And I'll often say something like, well, in 25 years, are our alumni devoting their energy, their talents, their resources, their time to the Jewish community, creating ideas, creating gatherings, inspiring people? And if they are, we succeeded, right? And we get that. This book is a testament to that. And not that anyone, you know, gets to claim that other than you, Mark, but to a sense of this as being one of the many and one of the brightest pictures of what the vibrancy of Yale Jewish life is. And for those of you who read the book, I have my copy here. We're like Consumer Reports here. I bought this. It's not provided and not a, you know, it's not one of those Amazon Vine purchases. It's really an awesome book. And you see Professor Rafi McGarrick, Rabbi Angela Buckdahl, like kind of luminaries of the Yale Jewish community thanked and featuring prominently in it to show how, you know, every book is assembled through a whole meeting of minds. I want to say one word kind of specifically in praise of the book. It's inspiring. I'm not all the way through yet, but I will be by Passover. That's my goal. I got a couple nights left. And I just know it's Mark, you did a great job. And I don't give that out lightly. You know, there's the Torah talks about the jealousy that scholars have towards one another. And in particular, there's a very moving chapter about education where Mark, you do three things. One is you really beautifully talk about the meaning of education, what it means to place one's children's flourishing at the center of one's life. And then you make a really kind of convincing and wide-scale argument about Jewish history, how we have been almost fanatically devoted to education in a way that was sometimes inspiring and sometimes kind of incomprehensible to our neighbors. And then you do a beautiful reading of Exodus 12 and 13 that places those themes literally at the heart of the Exodus moment, right? They're leaving and Moses is like, stop, we got to think about what this is like for the kids and how we're going to teach them. And to do those, each one of those is pretty good. And to do all three of them together is really something. And that happens kind of again and again, chapter after chapter. So I wanted to commend the work.
Thank you.
And thank you for showing up tonight, and even more for putting in the 15 years of work of teaching and writing and research. So first, I've got a bunch of prepared questions for Mark. We've kind of laid the groundwork, and then we are going to open this. So all y'all get chances through the chat. So you can send those either directly to me or to everyone. And in a little bit, 15, 20 minutes time, I'll turn the mic over to you proverbially. So number one here, just as Uri said, many of us on the call, we're anxious, getting ready for Passover. There's a lot of cleaning, maybe not a guest list, which you write beautifully about. But there is, my 6-year-old in the background, speaking of educating children. And so I wanted to ask, number one, Passover is coming. And you have a moment right here, right now, for those of us on the call, dozens of us here. We're going to be leading Seders, we'll be participating in Seders. What's one idea that you want us to kind of keep in mind, one practice, one question we should ask ourselves or others? Just you have our attention right now. What's your go-to for this Seder to focus on?
I think the important thing to focus on just at the beginning is, what is Pesach? And once we understand what Pesach is, we can understand how its meaning can be revealed to us. Pesach is two things. It is at once the authentic and biblically ordained Jewish New Year. It says in the Bible, this shall occur at the head of months. It's our New Year. It is also our spring festival. Now, almost every culture has a spring festival. I wrote in the book, the American Spring Festival is the Easter egg hunts on the White House lawn. I was wrong. In the next edition, God willing, I'm going to say what I really discovered it was, which is opening day. So how do we feel on opening day? How does one feel at a spring festival? One literally goes outside, one feels renewed, one feels rejuvenated, the sense of newness and opportunities in the air, particularly in Israel, where 500 million birds cross over, just giving the sense that you can be someone new, you can do something new, and God is on your side. And so it's with the spirit of spring. And it says, this shall occur in the month of spring. And it's so important that Pesach occur in the month of spring that in a lunar calendar like we Jews have, any day should go around. For instance, Ramadan has occurred in every month of the year. That's what would naturally happen on a lunar calendar. But we have fixed Pesach in the spring by including every 7 out of every 19 years, a leap month, to assure that Pesach occurs in the spring. Thus, the Jewish calendar revolves around Pesach, and therefore Jewish life revolves around Pesach. So why? Because, and this is the one thing I hope everyone can just realize, it is a new year. So what is one supposed to do with the new year? And the Haggadah enables us to do exactly what we should do, which is to take inventory of ourselves now and to think, who can I be personally, psychologically, communally, and nationally in the year to come? And the Haggadah is our great guidebook to help us to both ask and answer those questions. And every one of the great questions of life is asked and answered in the Haggadah, and the answers are in the most practical and actionable ways. This is the greatest guidebook ever written, and it'll be our treasure we're going to pick up on Saturday night, God willing.
Beautiful. So there's a sense of beginning and really committing to that beginning. And as you say, they point to the point again and again, you're not in this for Rosh Hashanah. You're really kind of partisan towards Passover, towards Pesach. Right. It's also a critical distinction for you. Okay, so now you've given the picture, really committing to beginning a new opening day for baseball. Great.
Right.
So now you also say in the book something that I think is really moving. This isn't just a guidebook for how to lead or participate in a great Seder. It's a guidebook for kind of how to be a human being. And so now zooming out a little bit, the context of the pandemic, the context of early 2021, what's a lesson that you think is especially timely right now for the American Jewish community to be thinking about from the Haggadah, not just Saturday night, but really all the days of our lives, as the Haggadah says?
Right. Well, yeah. So exactly, all the days of our lives, and I think one of the things that we realize. Well, let me answer with 2 ways. One, which we realized last year and this year uniquely, perhaps uniquely in Jewish history, or maybe not completely uniquely, but certainly in our day, is we now know why we have big Seders. Now, as you said, everything's in Exodus 12 and 13. And there's this very strange culinary rule in Exodus 12 that says at your Seder, it doesn't use the word Seder, but effectively, at your Seder, there can be no leftovers. Why are leftovers unkosher for Passover? Well, it explains. If your household is too small to consume a lamb by itself, it must be households. Which house is small? Ancient and modern science took 50 people to consume a lamb. Every household was too small to consume a lamb by himself. Therefore, what is Pesach? It is our new year, but it is also the first and fundamental night of Jewish peoplehood. It's the night when we go from being a fractured family to being a united people. And how do we do it? We do it in the spirit of hospitality, through the acts of giving and sharing. This is the fundamental act of a Jew, giving and sharing in a spirit of hospitality, households joining. So we have individuals joining families, we have families joining together, and what happens when families join? That's a community. What happens when communities join? That's a society. Thus, Pesach is the night when the Jewish community is formed and it builds. So in a regular year, how should we imitate the last meal in Egypt, which is what we're charged to do? We should have big Seders. There should be households joining. And importantly, in the Exodus text, it's not just Jews, it's Jews and the mixed multitudes. In other words, Gentiles. Jews, we should all invite Gentiles to our Seders. We should all invite strangers to our Seders. And we should do so out of allegiance to the biblical text, but also with the very practical fact that it's often going to be the Gentile, the person for whom this is so new, and who maybe never been to a Seder before, who so appreciates the experience, who asks the fresh questions, who brings the new insights, and we all do it in adhering to the biblical text. And this year, God willing, will be the last year of small Seders, because taking a life is always the most important thing. But next year, when we can gather together as the Bible tells us to, we should just appreciate it even greater.
Great. Yes, from your mouth to God's ears with that last one. Okay, so now I wanna sharpen things a little bit, maybe and raise the tension, hopefully productively. And I need to offer 2 kinds of prefaces before I turn a question over to you. So the first preface is, I would say, in kind of our national and moral moment. The way that I would describe the challenge of kind of the ongoing work of the Exodus, of liberation, of the amplification of freedom, is to be able to hold a kind of dialectic in America right now of pride at the liberatory dimension of what America is. Everything from the Declaration of Independence through abolition, through women's suffrage, all of that, and not to shy away from any of that pride, but to really embrace it. And also to hold regret, to hold the pain, to hold even a degree of shame about certain sins of America's past, and to really be able to do both of those, which is hard. And this is the fundamental Maimonidean dialectic of repentance, to be able to have enough of pride to kind of move forward and enough also consternation about one's past sins to not repeat them or propagate them. So that's the framing I want to offer. And the reason I think that that's important is because we can do a version of that as Jews also, right? Can we give a picture of Judaism that we're proud of, that we're transformed by, that we give our whole lives over to? And also we can name its shortcomings, and we are aware that sometimes bad things have been done or are done in its name in the present. That's kind of the broader frame. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I think your book generally doesn't kind of tread into that more kind of self-critical Jewish territory. And so I wanted to offer a text that does, and see how you'll respond.
A cheetah, a leopard, and the jaguar are all very closely related.
That's true, they are all closely related. So here's the second preface, just as a way of introducing the text. It's a text that takes place right before the 10th, and during the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. These words are hard to say. And it builds off a very small textual problem in the Torah, that before the 7th plague, the plague of hail, we hear that at this point, a number of Egyptians have come to fear Moses and believe his predictions, right? By the 7th plague, Moses is 6 for 6. And so when Moses says there's going to be hail, a lot of the Egyptians are wise to what that means, and they get their slaves and their cattle indoors, so they will survive, and they do survive. So then the kind of implicit question is, well, now what happens when we get to the 10th plague? Now Moses is 9 for 9, and he's announced that God is going to smite all the firstborns of the Egyptians, but everyone in the houses of the Israelites, which are marked on the lintels by blood, will be saved. Wouldn't some of the Egyptian parents try to do something? So there's actually one Midrashic tradition, which is really interesting, that the firstborns all came to Pharaoh and said, please let the Jews go so we won't die tomorrow night. And Pharaoh said no, so the firstborns actually rebelled and tried to overthrow the government, right? They were the most dangerous people because they had nothing to lose. Totally fascinating. I'm gonna go in a different direction. This haunting Midrash from Shemot Rabbah that says the night, hours before midnight, all across Egypt, Egyptian parents come up to their Israelite neighbors and knock on the door and say, would you take our child in for the night? And many of the Israelite parents, the Jewish parents, as you call them, say yes. And they take these Egyptian kids, and you imagine maybe some of them are infants and they're crying separated from their parents. Some of them are 12-year-olds that they maybe had sleepovers with these kids, right? The Israelite parents, Jewish parents have watched the Egyptian kids grow up with them. And they are saying, I want to be free. I want your society class, but that doesn't mean I want your kid to die. And they're there in the Israelite homes, kind of on some level trying to thwart God's plan a little bit, it seems. And then they go to sleep, and we see that God isn't foiled, right? God actually strikes down the Egyptian firstborn. The Midrash goes even in the homes of the Israelites, a kind of tragic moment. Or maybe not tragic, but it's a moment where God's plan proceeds despite the human attempts to thwart it. And so I wanted to ask you so what I find so remarkable about this text, just to be clear in the frame I gave, is it's a moment of saying, wow, some innocent kids died. Maybe by definition, all the kids are innocent. As the Torah says, the kids of the Egyptian slaves died also. They weren't the ones oppressing the Jews. And it really holds that kind of heartbreak there. It imagines the Israelite parents holding the heartbreak there also with us. It also says, yeah, but this is the end, it's the Exodus, and we're celebrating our freedom. And I wanted to hear how you would grapple with a passage like that doesn't want to tell necessarily a rosy history, but wants to draw our attention to sometimes the innocent people whose lives were taken, whose families were destroyed in the course of our achieving freedom. That's not an easy question, but you're up.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I think the Midrash reflects a fundamental misreading of the text. so I think the premise is faulty, and here's why, is that, so yes, the 10th plague is the slaying of the firstborn, leading one to ask, who is the firstborn? The one kind of person it cannot be is the chronologically firstborn. And how do we know that? It's because preceding that, many times we have God asking the Jews, will you be my firstborn? Now, if it's chronological, it's not a choice someone can do. So obviously we weren't the firstborn chronologically. There were the Perizzites and the Jebusites and the Hittites and the ancient Egyptians and lots of other people. So how can God ask us to be the firstborn? How can being a firstborn be a choice? And it's a beautiful literary statement, because everyone reading understands exactly the role of the firstborn. And I can just give an example that happened in my household. We're blessed with 4 kids. That happened in our household the other day, which is I told my 5-year-old daughter to do something, and she looked at me and she said, she pointed to her 12-year-old brother, who's the oldest, and said, I do what he tells me to do. In other words, not you, but it was a very profound and true thing she said, and it really reminded me of the 10th plague, because the role of the firstborn in a family is often, although importantly not always, to be the culture carrier. It's the role of the firstborn is to transmit the values of the parents to the next generation. And those of us parents of multiple children know this on some level, because imagine if our firstborn, who is probably, but by no means definitely, our eldest child, told the younger children, whatever mom and dad say, just forget it. Let's do the opposite. How will that family go compared to if the eldest child, or the person assuming the role of the eldest child, in other words, the genuine firstborn, says, I fundamentally agree, I'm following them, you should too. Very different. The other reason why it can't be chronological is because Genesis is all about subverting primogeniture. It's all about subverting the notion, which was dominant in the ancient world, that the chronologically firstborn should have any preferences over anybody else. We see this with Isaac and Ishmael. We see it with Jacob and Esau. We see it with Rachel and Leah. We see it with Perez and Zerah. We see it with Joseph and his brothers. And we see it in Exodus with Moses and his siblings. Every opportunity, literally, that the biblical author gets to subvert the Cain and Abel, every opportunity that the biblical author gets to subvert the notion of the firstborn, he or she seems to take it. So it can't be a chronological statement because of all these reasons. Most glaringly, that we're asked to be the firstborn. So who is the firstborn? The firstborn is the culture carrier, right? So what we see is that every home had a carrier of the culture of slavery. This was slavery. This was the culture that took Jewish baby boys and threw us in the Nile River. This was the culture. And just to get an example of the evil of this slavery, this is a contemporaneous from then explanation of it. He is dirtier than vines or pigs from treading under his mud. His clothes are stiff with clay. Entering into the wind, he is miserable. This is describing us. His sides ache, since he must be outside in treacherous winds. His arms are destroyed. What he eats is the bread of his fingers, and he washes himself only once a season. He is simply wretched through and through. So when God slayed the firstborn, that was the culture he was getting rid of. Now, if it was, the Bible is a fundamentally humane text. And a different kind of God, who's not our God, he could have just slain everybody, right? Instead, why does he only slay the firstborn? Why does he only slay the culture carrier? Because he doesn't want to slay everybody else. He easily could have, yet he chooses not to. And even before that, now Jason talked about the 7th plague, which is in some ways the most important plague. At least according to God, he says, this is all my plagues. So he says, this is all my plagues, it's the hail plague. What does he do? He warns the Egyptians. That's what he does on the 7th plague. He warns the Egyptians. He said, go take cover, go inside. As Jason said, Moses was 6 for 6. Comes to 7, he warns the Egyptians. Now, what kind of God would warn a people? Only a God who does not want to harm that people. In other words, only that people's God. So in the 7th plague, God establishes himself as the God of everybody who doesn't want to harm any of his children. Because if we warn somebody, what we're effectively saying is, I don't want to harm you. Don't make me harm you. Don't do the thing. If we want to harm him, we just harm him. But God warns in the 7th plague. It says some people obey, others don't. Those some people constitute the people we talked about before, the mixed multitudes. And but there's still, and the other kind of proof, and I'll conclude with this, that there's this culture of slavery that is slain, is after the 10th plague, the slaying of the firstborn. Does the Pharaoh agree that that A, the Jews should be freed, and B, in the truth of ethical monotheism. Well, he sends his charioteers to chase us into the desert, except charioteers is in the singular. In other words, these were multiple chariots with one mind.
Wow. That's amazing. It's very inspiring. I first want to point out the move that you made is the standard and brave move, which of Maimonides makes it, Nachmanides makes it. It's say that rabbinic story is wrong, right? It takes some great chutzpah to do it. So I appreciated that move here. I want to put a pin in the following comment here, which is one of the things which would be interesting for us to do when we're having a seminar on kind of biblical hermeneutics and not on Passover, would be the question is there a single idea in the Bible or multiple ones? So for example, in the firstborn, and you're absolutely right, the Genesis and almost every chance the Bible gets overturns or inverts the theme of firstbornness. David also is a great example.
Great example. He's number 8.
And right, Deuteronomy 21 is very clear that it says to fathers, right, you cannot favor your secondborn over your firstborn. There seems to be a moment there of holding that voice up. And also, if we really wanted to push, when you look through the early chapters of Exodus describing the plagues, there are two different kinds of accounts one can find of why there are so many plagues. One says Pharaoh's heart was hard, and it kind of took God all of this work to wear it down, to liberate the Jews, and kind of probably, as you said, God took the kind of least destructive route possible. And then there's another set, there are 5 places where this is said, where God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart in order that I may multiply my miracles against him so that the whole world will know my name. And there it seems like something different, God is choosing to kind of keep upping the ante, right? And we have these 2 different depictions of the Exodus, not just a single one with a single lesson, but these multiple conflicting ones, kind of like the multiple possibly conflicting ones of the firstborn. So I wanted to know that may be what we're kind of playing with here in our different approaches. And that'll be fun for everyone to dance that dance at your Seders together.
Absolutely, and if you don't mind that
please.
Yeah, I think the part about about God hardening Pharaoh's heart might be one of the most misunderstood parts of the Exodus story, and also one of the most inspiring parts of the Exodus story. Because in the first 5 plagues, the Pharaoh hardens his own heart. It's only by plague 6 where it says God hardens Pharaoh's heart, teaching us what happens to a heart. Once we do an action, the heart never returns to what it was before. Every act we do influences the heart. So what happened? The Pharaoh had developed the habit of keeping the Jews in time. Once we develop a habit of something, it's as though God hardened our heart. Now, that's the bad news. This is the good news. As we prepare to sit down for the great Jewish New Year celebration, we can think, how can I be a different person? What characteristic about myself do I want to change in the coming year? And all of those who are above a certain age, which I'm definitely above, have said something to the effect or thought, I am who I am. Maybe God made me this way, maybe, who knows? But I am who I am. Could be all kinds of things. In comes Judaism and says, no, you're not. And in comes Judaism that says, let's say, pick a characteristic you want. Let's say you want to be a different person and pick a characteristic. We can do one of 2 things. We can plunge the depths of our childhood to try to figure out why we're not, generous enough, or as generous as we would like to be, why I'm not a generous person. Or we can say, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to give more tomorrow than I did today. And I'm going to give more Wednesday than I do tomorrow. And the Talmud says that within 90 days of doing the thing, you will become that thing. 90 days. Modern science ran the same experiment and said, nope, it takes 66 days. So the bid ask on being a different person is 2 to 3 months. And this is what we see with the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh constantly refuses to free the Jews, and then he develops, God forbid, that habit. But on the flip side, we can say, I would like to develop this characteristic, and somewhere between 66 and 90 days, we can become that kind of person just by developing the habit that we choose, just by doing the thing.
Great. Beautiful. So I want to remind everyone out there, you can submit questions. I bet you have some about Passover, unless you're unlike any other group of Jews 3 days after Passover I've ever met. Mark, I did want to ask you, you mentioned early on in this conversation the importance of inviting Gentiles to the Seder.
Yeah.
You've done work, supporting Christian missionary work that's related to medicine and philanthropic work more broadly. And I was struck actually by the kind of warm embrace of Christianity's embrace of the Seder, I would say, especially in contemporary America, without any kind of nose turning up of supersessionism, of appropriation. And I wanted to give you a chance to kind of unpack a little bit theologically what you see going on there in Jewish-Christian relations. Not forgetting, we're here at Yale, which was originally chartered, so people may not know this, as a congregationalist school, specifically Christian institution. And that original charter, fascinating, was transferred to the Divinity School. Whereas Yale College was actually in the charter under which the law school operates, was a kind of a concession to Connecticut's ecumenicism after disestablishing the Congregational Church in 1818. So in some ways, even Yale College is a little bit of and the law school and all of those schools, everything except the Divinity School is a concession to a certain kind of secularism of American modernity, and the Divinity School carries on this tradition of a pilgrim tradition, really. So tell us from your perspective, and you work closely with Christians, you obviously see their presence at the Seder is important in your broadcasting and media work. Tell us how you think about the relationship between Judaism and Christianity.
Yeah, what a beautiful question. And yeah, I think we should acknowledge that, because I've seen it. Let me just from experience. So yes, I co-founded and I chair Africa Mission Healthcare, which partners with Christian missionary doctors and hospitals in Africa. So I've gotten to know particularly evangelical, but also the Catholic community very well in that respect, and all kinds of other work. We partnered with CBN, Christian Broadcast Network, and all kinds. So I've gotten to know the community very well, and that knowledge. And then I've gotten very involved with Eagle's Wings, which sends primarily young millennial evangelical pastors to Israel. I've gone with them on their trips. And then in the process of speaking about the book, really in the last 4 weeks or so, I've been invited to speak to 2 to 4 churches a day. And it's so easy to do because of Zoom, and it's such a blessing of the technology. So I've spoken to a lot of Christian groups about the Exodus story, about the Seder, and about the Haggadah. And the love that all of these Christian groups have, from the leadership of Kojak on Sunday to churches in Tennessee, California, Texas, upstate New York, Kenya, all over the world. It's this profound love of all things Jewish. And that is, of course, the Jewish state. It's the Jewish religion. It's the Jewish holidays. It's the Jewish people, and it's our shared sacred text of the Exodus, which is just what we happen to be discussing, but not even just the Exodus, because every Tuesday at noon I teach primarily evangelical pastors. Now we're on Genesis. So it's this, and there's this love to learn, how did Jews understand the Genesis, the Exodus? We did Deuteronomy last year. How did Jews understand these stories? And this is, I mean, I'm just thinking, yesterday morning I was on this call with Kojak, the Church of God in Christ, and one of the leaders said, our family wants to do Seders this year. How can I do it? And I just said, that is such a magnificent question. I mean, I said, we've been waiting 6,000 years for friends like you. We've not had friends like you in 6,000 years. I said, in fact, there's a curse in the Bible where Balaam says, you shall be a people who dwells alone. That is a curse. I said, now, thanks to you, that curse is lifted. And this is in the last 40 years, where this friendship has been born, developed, and it's blossoming, and we can all participate in it. And its focal point, as the rabbi said, is the Seder. And I think it's just so important. Obviously, we can't do it this year, but it's so important to just invite Christians to our Seders and to let them share in this experience. It's great for everybody, particularly us, as we see how much they love and appreciate this great holiday, and then we join in, and it's great for our kids to see it. But this friendship is of world historic importance. I think it has theological implications. I don't know what they are, but I don't think we can know such things, because God says to Moses, you will know me by my back. So our descendants will have some idea, but the notion that Balaam's curse is lifted, no doubt true. And that we have friends like we've never had before. And it's not like this is tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, maybe even more. And it's all growing literally every day.
Wow. And I just want to mark, it sounds like you're saying, implicit in what you're saying is that the Christianity of contemporary America and the broader global Christianity nowadays is, at least in large part, different from, not continuous with,
Exactly.
has done tshuva for the Christianity that was, triumphalist over Judaism.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. And I love the word continuous, because when I was speaking with a group yesterday, I said there are historical continuities, and then there are historical discontinuities, right? There are just things that do change. There are new things under the sun. And this is one of them. This is a historical discontinuity. Forget the technology. If any of us could tell our grandparents that 3 to 4, and we're not even marketing it, but 3 to 4 Christian groups are finding me every day to want to discuss the Exodus because I wrote a book on the Haggadah, they wouldn't have believed it. I mean, they come with such deep love of all things Jewish. And I mean, it's your word, it's absolutely discontinuous, and it's upon us.
Wow.
And you're right. There was the discontinuity. It could not be more stark. I mean, I talk in the book about how the Seder was often a time of terror, because, for a period in history, this was tragically typical. We had to use white wine instead of red wine because there was a rumor in the nearby Gentile communities that the red wine was that we were drinking the blood of Christian children, right? And by the way, it didn't work. It was still, it didn't work. And this is where things were several hundred years ago, but and now we're where we are now. It just gives such hope, and the love is it's so real, it's so profound. I mean, I've seen it now on this book tour. I've seen it in Israel with Eagle's Wings, and yeah, it's awesome.
I do want to share just a fun moment of Yale, Judaism and Christianity intersecting. The 5th president of Yale was Ezra Stiles, who one of his first innovations was to mandate Hebrew education in the college. And his initial commencement address, I'm laughing, it's so crazy, he gave in Hebrew and Aramaic.
Wow, when was that?
And after 7 years, he gave a speech where he repealed the Hebrew curriculum, complaining of the tremendous quantity of effort with only a small amount of learning dividends to show among the students that they're learning in Hebrew. And I just feel like it's such a profound moment of American Christianity and American Hebrew schools all over, the tremendous efforts learning Hebrew. What sometimes feels like so little to show for it.
Well, that's so interesting, because I have a chapter in the book where I say, the chapter is called The Greatest Seder of Them All. So if what a Seder is the reliving and retelling the story of the Exodus, what's the greatest Seder ever conducted? No question, it's American history, right? Because American history is one long act of reliving and retelling the story of the Exodus. From the moments that the ships landed on the shores, they were dreaming Exodus dreams. And I go through basically so much of American history, which is just punctuated by Moses at every step of the way, including the fact that in the Capitol, on the House of Representatives side, there are reliefs of 23 lawmakers, English lawmakers, Roman, Greek. 11 are facing one way, 11 are facing the other. Moses is in the middle. So America is a Moses nation. One word to describe America, it's a Moses nation.
So so good. So let's go there. It's a great chapter. And I wanted to ask, as I was reading it, I was wondering, and so what Mark does in this chapter, he points out how famously Benjamin Franklin suggests an image of the Israelites crossing the sea as the seal of the United States, right? Crossing the sea, not so hard to get to. And then also Moses is the central figure in a whole bunch of Black spirituals about ending slavery. And so I wanted to ask you how it's, it's an irony, a kind of a biting irony that, Benjamin Franklin, Jefferson, let's take as an example, right, sees himself as the Israelites and his slaves see him as Pharaoh. And how do you, I mean, it captures, I think, in some ways, the paradox of America, maybe better than any other image. And I was wondering, as I was reading the chapter, how you kind of hold that paradox nowadays in terms of it is the country of Moses, but it's also the country of, for some Moseses, it's also the country of Pharaoh.
Yeah, well, it's the Exodus narrative, and Michael Walzer, he wrote this magnificent book in the mid-'80s called Exodus and Revolution, And he said that he went to Mississippi during Freedom Summer as a college student in '63. And he said, I was just struck by how I would go into black church all the time, black church after black church every weekend. And all the sermons were about the Exodus. He said, this was the great freedom narrative in America. He said, this was the inspirational story of that generation's great struggle. And then Martin Luther King gave one of his great early speeches up the avenue from here at St. John the Divines. He gave the same speech at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. The speech was called The Death of Evil by the Sands of the Seashore. Underneath the title, he wrote Exodus 14:30. He was giving an interpretation, literally, of Exodus 14:30. And this was a great freedom story. This was the inspiring narrative. This was the instruction manual, the guidebook that he used in the freedom struggle of his day. And it has been for all of us. Of course, it's been interpreted, it's been misinterpreted, but it is the great, when we think about freedom, we think in Exodus terms, we think in Exodus language. The language of freedom is written in Exodus. And we're just so privileged to every year be able to relive and retell this great story, which has inspired, it's not just the United States. In Michael Walzer's book, he goes all around the world and how the Exodus story has inspired freedom seekers everywhere. And but particularly America. There's been no country like America that has been so thoroughly infused by Moses and the Exodus. And you know, and I have another chapter in the book called The Unfinished, because every great Jewish story has one thing in common: it's not finished, right? There are 5 expressions of redemption. There are 4 cups of wine. The Torah concludes, Moses is not in the promised land. We finally get around to telling the story of the Exodus in the Haggadah through Deuteronomy 26, which is interesting. We leave out the part of we arrived in the land. No great Jewish story ever finishes. So what I said is, in that spirit, any goal that can be successfully completed in one's lifetime is not a Jewish goal. So when we set goals for ourselves or individually, communally, nationally, we have to set goals that we can't achieve during our lifetime, because that's what a great Jewish story is. So of course, America is very much unfinished, but in that, it's right along with Moses as well.
Great. So I want to parse out what Mark was saying there about the 4 and 5 cups of wine, just because it happened very fast. So there are 4 cups of wine that are drunk at the Seder that are kind of the signposts. And there's a 5th cup of wine that's poured between cups 3 and 4, but not consumed. This is being Elijah's cup. Doors opened, etc. Now, the significance of that is that in the Talmud Yerushalmi, the origin of those 4 cups of wine is traced back to the languages of redemption in Exodus 6, I believe, where God actually uses 5 verbs. I will bring you out, I will take you, and the 5th one, I will bring you into the land. And it seems to be that in the, I think 13th century is the earliest attestation we have of Elijah's cup. It's very moving, right? That we, imagine you're living in southern France or something in, 1290, and you experience 4 pieces of redemption. You're taken out of Egypt, we become God's covenant people, we receive the Torah, etc. But we don't have the land. We don't have that 5th verb. God has not brought us into the land. And so the way that that's made real in ritual is that not have the 5th redemption is kind of poured out, but kept there just out of arm's length for Elijah. And just to bring the story up to the 20th century, Rabbi Menachem Kasher, one of the amazing rabbis of the 20th century, who was living in Jerusalem in 1948, produced an incredible Haggadah that has facing pages of the Egyptian temples, the Egyptian pyramids on one page, and the gates of Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, on the other. It's kind of incredible and haunting. I'm getting goosebumps describing it. Has a whole essay where he says, now it's a mitzvah to drink Elijah's cup. We're here now. And I will share, actually, I was at a conference a few years ago, and I asked Michael Walzer whether he agrees, whether the redemption is here or whether it's gone. And he said, I have to get back to you on that one. I'm not sure. He hasn't gotten back to me today, but I just wanted to bring the story full circle here. That is really, in some ways, the question, right? Is this, redemption kind of everything we can imagine? It's a fundamental question of messianism, whether it's kind of a political category or whether it's and we have it in Israel, or whether it's an ontological category and, death and warfare disappear, and therefore we very much don't have it.
Right. Well, I mean, that's such a beautiful thing to bring up. I mean, Menachem Kasher said, now that Israel's established, we can drink the 5th cup, right? And he actually thought he would start a movement where people would drink the 5th cup. It didn't actually take, but he had a great point there. But if we ask, who are the two best Jews in the Bible? We probably agree it was Abraham and Moses, right? But then we ask, who's the worst Jew in the Bible? It's going to be Korach, right? And what's Korach's great sin? Korach's great sin is that he says all the people are holy. So what's wrong with that? Is that he's saying we're done, we're finished. If we are holy, we're finished. There's nothing more to do. We've achieved it. What he should have said was, all the people strive to be holy. In that one, that's a huge difference. And you know what Korach means bald, right? And so what grows on a bald head? Nothing. So basically, when you're finished, when you're satisfied, you can't grow anymore, and that's about the worst thing you could do. So we're very much unfinished, and that's what makes it a great Moses story, is that we're very much unfinished.
Beautiful. We have a question that came in from Mark Zwillinger. Mark, we're handing it over to you about this Seder that's coming up.
Yeah, I was going over the things we talked about tonight, and I was thinking that, as a parent of 2 college students, sometimes college students aren't the biggest fans of introspection. So your first point was, it's an opportunity to decide who you want to be again anew for the year, and they don't even know who they are yet, much less decide who they want to be anew. And I was thinking about the second point, which I followed the debate for a while about the meaning of the firstborn, which was very interesting to me, because I actually thought the firstborn was about a rebuke to Egyptian society at the time, which was primarily based on all the benefits went to the people who were chronologically born first. So I actually thought it was a chronological thing. But I thought about both these things. And I said, well, this year is sort of different, right? We have the lessons of the pandemic to mix with the story of the Haggadah and try to make Seder especially meaningful for college students. I was just wondering if there are any thoughts you had about, the college age and how to bring the pandemic lessons and the Haggadah lessons together to make this a particularly meaningful Seder.
What a magnificent question. Absolutely. So, let's just talk about the 4 questions for a while. So we all know the 4 questions: dipping, reclining, matzah, and vegetables, right? Why is that different from all other nights? Now, how many of us have been to a Seder where a child has left from her chair and says, oh my God, we're dipping twice. Tell me about the Exodus. Like, this has never happened, I think. And if I'm even directionally accurate, then why hasn't some smart person in the last 2,000 years said, you know what, I'm going to replace it with 4 better questions? The answer is because there aren't 4 better questions, because all generic education is at best mediocre. That when it comes to educating our children, particularly in this way, when it comes to arousing the interest of our children, we have to identify the sacred, unique point of who they are at this point in their life. Every child is created in the image of God. God is quintessentially unique. Therefore, every child is unique. So we have to think, what is the access point for this child? Because I think every child has it within him or her to really want to discover themselves more deeply and to understand how could they be a better citizen of their community, of their society, of the world. I think that's fairly fundamental. It's up to us Jewish educators and parents of Jewish educators just to say what is specific. Now, apparently Rav Soloveitchik, this would, Mark, be for kids younger than yours, but Rav Soloveitchik's grandfather used to come into the Seder wearing a pot on his head. Why? Because why is it different from all other nights? What we do is we throw marshmallows at the kids when they ask a good question. So I would say, let's think about what is really distinctive about this precious child who are going to be at the Seder. And let's see, what's the access point for him or her? And if they love music or mysticism or baseball, whatever it is, make that the access point with which we tell the story. And I think when we do that, we do so with such authenticity, because the fact that the 4 questions are so bad is basically telling us you have to ask your own questions, or even you have to inspire your own questions. So let's just think about what is the access point for that child. There's this great truth. I'm going to say line, but it's more than a line. It's a truth from the Kutzker Rebbe, who somebody went to the Kutzker Rebbe and said, I've been through the Talmud 3 times. He said, terrific. How many times has the Talmud gone through you? If we try to get through the whole Haggadah on Seder night, it won't get through any of us. So instead, we have to say, I'm not going to get through the whole Haggadah. That's part of the fact that a great Jewish story concludes unfinished. What can I really discuss from the Haggadah in depth that'll really impact these specific children who are at my table?
I'm thinking it's very moving about how just important the preparation as you talk about.
Absolutely.
It, bookmark is so critical, and it's not just about getting your house ready. It's about setting aside a few hours, thinking about your kid, doing some Googling, printing out some stuff, like getting ready, maybe giving them an assignment. And I'm thinking about the version of the wicked child in Yerushalmi. They say, what is this like long, arduous thing you make us do every year? Right. And that's like a complaint. Not the wicked child is really, they have parents who are not good pedagogues, you'd be saying, right? They're just kind of doing a pro forma thing.
Well, exactly. And the answer to the wicked child is it says blunt his teeth, which does not mean hit him in the face. We know that because Ezekiel and Jeremiah both say the father ate sour grapes and the son's teeth were blunted. So the father is taking the blame for the son's behavior. But yeah, absolutely. It's all about how can we tap the sacred uniqueness of each child, and we can give a great Seder experience. We just can't go through the whole thing. And I think if we try to go through the whole thing, and the rabbi's point about preparation is so important, because Rav Soloveitchik said all holiness involves preparation. And I think he was so right, but he was the most right when it came to the Seder. But so many people, they think I was on this radio show, like right when this process started, sort of 3 or 4 weeks ago now. And the host, it was an Orthodox radio show. And he said, I'm just so surprised that you're so enthusiastic about the Pesach, because it's like so much of a burden to many of us. I'm like, well, then, and I didn't, what I really should have said was, then let's talk about your interpretation of the preparation. Like, if there's anything burdensome about this great holiday, I would say you're preparing wrong. The kind of prep, I'm having a great time tonight. Like, this should be the kind of preparation we should be doing, like trying to come to grips with the existential questions asked in the Haggadah, and then thinking about each child. Order this stuff on Amazon, and let's think about the big questions.
Great. So I told you all Mark was a fun conversation partner. I hope that's you're feeling that full force now through Zoom. So it's 8:55. So I want to pause for station identification. I want to thank Mark again. A huge thank you to you, and also to my colleagues, Uri Cohen, Slifka's executive director, Jennifer Rojan Wallace, who's our development director, Lynn Jackson Quinn, and Manuel Can, who are on the call. Also, the whole team behind all of these. It's a really fun place to work and to be. And again, to thank you all for being here tonight, and for really kind of constituting this community, that group, right? We can't be in a 30 or 40 person Seder right now. And this is kind of the closest we'll get in terms of numbers, many of us. So we're doing it here, right? This is not just preparation, this is the thing itself. And that really blurring that line is so much of this. And as we conclude, like like we often do here, I want to turn it a bit more personal. Mark, you're a guy who's in love with Judaism, in love with its teachings, transformed by it, full of energy and passion, and wanted to hear how what Jewish values have really kind of worked their way deep into your heart, and you find kind of expressing themselves through you over the 15 years you mentioned of researching, writing, doing the teaching that developed into this book, obviously while raising little kids and being a busy guy. So just tell us kind of personally how you and where you've been touched by Judaism, Jewish teaching, Jewish values and wisdom, so we can get to know who Mark Gerson is better.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, yeah, what a nice question. Jewish wisdom is truly endlessly deep and endlessly generative, both. Is that as soon as I didn't finish the book, I submitted the book and the publisher printed it, and then and Amazon sold it. And then, but about a week after I submitted it, I opened up a Google Doc for new things that I learned subsequently that I'd like to include in the next edition. And I think that'll keep happening until I die, because it's truly endlessly generative. So, there are so many things that I learned from Jewish teaching that are in the book, and even subsequently that, let me just talk about 2 of them. One is, and I encourage everyone, read the chapter, please, on all who are hungry, come and eat, because why are we issuing an invitation to people who are already there? Well, I give one interpretation of the book, but another interpretation, which I also have a chapter on, which is that we are given the instruction in the Exodus context over and over again to love the strangers, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And I think one of the great teachings of Judaism comes from, and not only him, but he said it so well, the Menachem Shearson, the Chabad Rebbe who died in '94. Really, the more I learned about him, one of the all-time greats, not 20th century greats, one of the all-time greats. And one of the many things he taught was how seriously to take words. So I don't know if this was his point, but he would have certainly have agreed with it. He didn't say this, but he said God could have created the world by snapping the divine fingers. Instead, he does throw with 9 and God says. So if God creates his world with words, so too do we create our worlds